Okay, part of the 60 Minutes interview there. We were going to show you some of the tough questions. We couldn't find that tape. The other interview that got a lot of attention was New Republic. President Obama talking to the New Republic. Here's a quote. One of the biggest factors is going to be how the media shapes debates. If a Republican member of Congress is not punished on Fox News or by Rush Limbaugh for working with a Democrat on a bill of common interest, then you'll see more of them doing it. The same dynamic happens on the Democratic side. I think the difference is just that the more left-leaning media outlets recognize that compromise is not a dirty word. We're back with the panel. Okay, Jonah, your thoughts?
I don't know, starting with the 60 Minutes interview, I think it was a grotesque embarrassment for CBS News. I think that this is the kind of thing, this is the People magazine-ification of 60 Minutes, which historically was always the news program that politicians were supposed to be most scared of. It is inconceivable that any of the journalists at Fox, if they had gotten an interview with George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice or Colin Powell, would have gone nearly remotely the same zip code as soft as 60 Minutes did. The New Republic has more of an excuse. They're a flagship liberal publication, but it's funny, this editor of the New Republic, Chris Hughes, who's a .com millionaire and a donor, and he used to work for Obama, he says in his letter to readers in the new issue, in the same issue that has this interview, he says how they're going to have no partisan bias, that they're not going to push a party line, that they're not going to be biased towards one group or one party. And yet this thing was basically dictation from the President of the United States.
Mara.
Yeah. I think that, you know, Chris Hughes is going to have to prove that. And right out of the gate, he did an interview with the president, and he's a big donor and a former employee. It seemed a little weird and full of conflict. The Steve Kroft interview, what I thought was so interesting, when you hear him asking that question, why did you want to do this? I could almost see the thought bubble over his head. Why did I agree to do this? Because it was, you know, a kind of puff piece exit interview, you know, pat on the head for Hillary, and he played along, from what we can tell.
Exit interviews are one thing. Listen, at the end of 2 terms, looking back over 2 terms, that's one thing. I've done one of those, and you ask certain kinds of questions, reflective. The president's starting a second term in the middle of controversy. The Secretary of State has just come off a controversial testimony on Capitol Hill. There are hot spots all over the world. There are a few questions to ask that probably could be a little bit more pointed.
And when you think about all the things that, all the ground that wasn't covered, whether it was Syria or Benghazi or, for that matter, the budget battle, we haven't heard him explain anything about that, and I'm dying to hear what he has to say. So, but I guess he's having a second honeymoon.
I love to hear the president whine about Fox News and talk radio. I think we ought to be proud of the fact that we annoy him so much. Obviously, you know, if you look at the lineup on one side, the liberal media you start with, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, PBS, MSNBC, the elite newspapers, the one remaining news magazine, the universities, Hollywood, it doesn't stop anywhere. And on the other side, talk radio, Fox News, and they can't stand the fact that they no longer have a monopoly. So I think it ought to be taken as a compliment. And you know what I've always said about Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch, their genius was understanding and locating a niche audience in broadcast cable news, which is half the American people, the half that have suffered for decades by the fact that you get the news presented from a single perspective over and over again. And finally, the fact that there is a new perspective, talk radio and Fox, and they can't stand it. A source of pride, I would say.
Does this hurt 60 Minutes?
Probably not, because it'll be sloughed off as just another softie. But I think if you were El Aram, the semi-official paper in Egypt, and you had an interview like this with the president, you'd be embarrassed.
I think that's right. You know, and it's an amazing thing. You have corporate executives, rich people, rich liberals, who looked at the current landscape of American television, and their response was, you know, what we really need is a network to the left of MSNBC. And so Al Gore created Current, which is now Al Jazeera. There is this really otherworldly view in the mainstream media.